speaker, Jim Biddle, has spent quite a bit of time researching the topic of William Clarke Quantrill, and I anticipate you will have an interesting evening. I saw a few of his slides this afternoon, so Jim, it is your program.
All right, thank you. Well, tried to figure out exactly how to introduce this and why I was interested. And it takes back a number of years ago. My interest really began in Quantrill when my wife and I moved to Bates County in the early 1980s. Uh, I'm a native Ohioan from the Cincinnati area. My wife grew up in Boonville and is an MU grad. We met there and decided to move back. And the war living in Bates County took on a more human proportion. When I was studying the Civil War in college, and I have a history major and a poli sci major, but the Civil War was so vast, so big that I just never got a scale of it. Living in Western Missouri, in the area where in the morning, waking up to the sounds of the ducks and the geese and the cows and the wolves, it took on, I could hear these folks riding through the mist, and it became interested. Then when I discovered that William Clarke Quantrill was from Ohio, it further stroked my interest. And Quantrill has always puzzled me as an individual. And I have tried to figure out some words to describe him. And that's why I made the reference in the newsletter to the Kansas City Public Library program, which will again wholeheartedly endorse if you have not had the opportunity to listen to. I thought it was a superb YouTube. But the terms that started coming in the last several days have been things like he was two-faced, he was a liar, he bamboozled people. And then I came up with, I think the best word yet was conniving uh, in what he did, in what he could have people believe. Now, one of the things that note as we go along, and I have gotten to the point on my research that I've thrown up my hands and I give up on this one, is the spelling of the name. Clarke and Quantrill. There are different ways to spell it. And you will, as you read and research the gentleman, you will find out. So here we go. William Clarke Quantrill was born in Canal Dover, Ohio. Canal Dover was a toll station on the Ohio Erie Canal. Again, doing some research, we're friends out here with a former professor at University of New Mexico in engineering, who's originally from Illinois. And I asked him, Jerry, were there a lot of canals in Illinois? And he said, well, the Chicago River, but not really the canal system. So dealing with an audience in Missouri, to describe the canals were hand dug ditches that carried little boats from one point to another. If you think of the, what was it, the Erie Canal in New York, well, they were all over Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. And where Quantrill grew up, being a toll station, was really kind of, well, it wasn't Mayberry. It was a very sophisticated, for that time period, little town. He was the oldest child of two immigrants from the eastern part of the United States, Thomas Quantrill and Carolyn Clarke. Mrs. Quantrill came from a very, very poor background, which shows up later on in the presentation. Thomas was a tinsmith, and that's what originally brought him to town to ply his trade of doing tin work for the housing and for the homes. He became a school teacher, then a principal, and ultimately the superintendent of schools in Canal Dover. The other thing, Dover is part of that old northeastern Ohio area that is a football heaven. Get the one school district that when a baby boy is born in the district, the Boosters Club come to the hospital to present the newborn with a football. Massillon. If your football coach is not looking for recruits in that area, he's missing out. Is Quantrill and decided to go west to Kansas seeking cheap land. And usually this was done in groups from the same town. But with his group, there were a series of little incidents. People's personal property and belongings seemed to disappear and were found in his tent. He was kind of asked, do you want to leave the group? And thus decided and the start of his Civil War adventures. The most notable of which was Lawrence, Kansas. Now, again, in reading this, and I know we've had programs and discussions on this, there seems to be varied reasons for this, for Lawrence, Kansas. Was it for the revenge of the burning of Osceola? For the assassination of Jim Lane and Charles Robertson? Or simply to plunder and kill? But the raid seems to mark a change in Quantrill's life. After the raid in 63, he was less interested in making grandiose raids and various other things, and his followers seemed to separate under different leaders, Bloody Bill Anderson among others. Well, during this time frame, the Confederate Army was suffering some setbacks and finally surrendered to Grant. Quantrill had, during the war effort, journeyed east to meet General Lee, seeking a promotion to colonel, but he was not successful. In fact, I don't even think he was allowed to meet General Lee, but he had at least sought that. Upon Lee's surrender, Quantrill took what was left of his followers and headed east into Kentucky. Again, there are a number of reasons speculated for this move. One of which is to conduct guerrilla warfare in Kentucky. There were guerrilla operations in Kentucky, so he was just adding more to that. Or I think more likely was to seek better surrender terms as a regular Confederate soldier rather than as a guerrilla. Again, as we've discussed in the past, being a Confederate guerrilla and surrendering didn't necessarily mean you were going to live more than 2 or 3 minutes. And I will point out here, there's some question as to Quantrill's rank. He referred to himself as a captain, and can't seem to find any record about where that commission came from or anything about it. When Quantrill was in Kentucky, he and his followers were encountered a group of federal guerrilla hunters just outside of Louisville. Mix that up. And they engaged in a firefight at Taylorsville, Kentucky. It's about 35 miles southeast of Louisville. In that firefight, Quantrill was shot in the spine and was paralyzed and was transported to a military hospital where he died on June the 6th of 1865. From that point on, there are various stories that abound on the internet of no, he lived and survived. One, he used his pocket knife to dig himself out of the grave that he was buried. Another one was he was in the state of Washington, uh, where he was identified by a writer. It goes all over the stories that you will see. Okay, here begins our story. The sources keep saying that Quantrill was taken to a military hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. And perhaps it was some kind of a field hospital, but I truly believe that it was, and have seen at least one citation for this. But again, who knows? Whatever people write seems to be varied. But I believe that it was the Portland U.S. Marine Hospital, which is one of the first hospital medical facilities for America's boatsmen that were plying the inland rivers. Uh, when I first started my research, I looked up the U.S. Marine Hospital, Portland, Kentucky, and there was one little note by someone, "Yay, I love everything U.S. Marines. This has nothing to do with the Marine Corps. It's seamen, again, that are plying the waters of the inland waterways, the Ohio, the Missouri." Louisville is located at an area, the falls of the Ohio River system, necessitating a lock for ships, for boats to go either north or south on the Ohio River, east or west, I guess that would be. One of the little bits of notation that I came across that I found of very interest, the depth of the Ohio River as a whole is like 24 feet. But just west of Louisville, Kentucky, it's 130 feet deep. Ships could not come beyond Louisville. They had to portage around, or then a series of locks were built at the city to be able to move folks. And this was a great place for a hospital. That's where the seamen would have some time waiting, or maybe even changing shifts or changing crews. So this is the marker outside of the U.S. Marine Hospital. It was a prototype. 7 more hospitals throughout the eastern part of the United States were built under this design, and it's located at the falls of the Ohio. It's a picture of the renovated. It's gone through many lives since it was first built as a hospital. Then it became part of the hospital system in the city of Louisville. Then it was a public health service facility. Then it was abandoned, and now it's being renovated back to a community public health service facility. So it's seen many lives, but to be able to survive this many years, and I'd say it's maybe 10 years ago, my wife and I visiting my sister in Louisville went by the area. So it's a substantial, neat building. It's a map of the area. Kind of in the upper right, the dark green is an island in the Ohio River. Then the next blue down is the lock system through which ships, boats, etc. would have to go. Marked with the star, the Marine Hospital, and then several blocks away is a cemetery, St. Joseph Cemetery, which will come into play later on. But that, I believe, is the site of the first grave of William Clarke Quantrill. That I believe he died in the Marine Hospital, And then his body was transported to the closest cemetery, which would be St. Joseph. While at the hospital, and I haven't had a chance to visit with our minister and to discuss the theological ramifications of this, but my terminology is that Quantrill, after his life uh, and all the issues that he raised and found found Jesus. And the best story that I can come up with off the top of my head is the story of Christ being crucified in telling the prisoner on the one side of him that today you'll be with me in paradise. That the prisoner was remorseful for what he had done. Now, can Quantrill be remorseful and seek forgiveness for all that he did within his life? That is a question above my pay grade. But he did ask the minister to do a couple of things for him. Distribute what money he had. It sounds like about $700, and to make sure that he was buried and that his grave was unrecognizable. Both the priest and Quantrill realized, given his reputation and what all he had done, that grave would be desecrated within no time. So this was done by talking to the sexton of the cemetery and asking him to kind of help things out, throw out dishwater, washwater, whatever he might have on the newfound grave so it would be indistinguishable from other areas. Um, if you have the privilege or duty to go to uh, a cemetery where new graves, you would note how long it takes for them to kind of fill in, even with the best of conditions. Now, this is a picture that I pulled off the internet, so forgive the fuzziness of it, of St. John's Cemetery. Originally, it was developed as the German Catholic Cemetery on the west side of Louisville, and then later conveyed over to the Catholic cemetery system. It was known as St. Mary's Cemetery, and then finally the name was changed to St. John's Cemetery. Uh, this looks a lot nicer than what I remember it to be. Again, pulled off the internet, uh, but to give an example of how the street has been cut down, leaving Terry higher than the area around it and the community around it. Uh, it's a cemetery that has fallen on very difficult times. Uh, I think every city, I know my native Cincinnati, I can point out some places, even in Columbia, the Columbia Cemetery by the library, his it takes a lot of work and effort and money to keep them maintained, and this is a problem of raising. One of the things that I was doing some notes here real quickly before we met on the program. And I remembered a conversation that I had with my late brother-in-law in Missouri, who practiced law in Western Missouri. It was about cemeteries. The law of cemeteries varies from state to state. I distinctly remember him telling me that in Missouri, we could get together and start a cemetery. We put all of our nickels and dimes together, buy some land, and we've got the Civil War Roundtable Cemetery, Columbia, Boone County, wherever. Uh, so trying to follow the rules and the regulations as a state by state basis So if it's kind of like the gentleman with the Yay U.S. Marines, you have to know the background of the state that you're dealing with. Um, when Quantrill's body was here, this was the last time his entire earthly body was placed in one place. About 10 years afterwards, his dear mother, who was now a widow and impoverished, wanted to see if she could get his body to be brought home to Dover, Ohio. And she enlisted the help of a family friend, W. Scott, who was the editor of the local newspaper in Canal Dover. Um, they went to Kentucky at Mr. Scott's expense, and they met with the sexton of the cemetery. Actually, he had passed away, and his wife had been named sexton of the cemetery. And they discussed the idea of moving. Well, at first, Mrs. Quantrill said, "I'd like to put him in a casket, uh, lead lined, and to take care of his body." Well, the sexton wasn't quite sure because there weren't the proper court orders. But the next day, weather was really, really bad, and Mr. Scott and a couple of gravediggers went to the graveyard and they exhumed the body. He took the skull back to the hotel where Mrs. Quantrill was, and she identified the skull by means of a broken tooth that she remembered from his childhood. Scott then put what bones he could find. Now, remember, it's been in the ground for 10 years. Um, so it had kind of fallen apart. Um, I did a little bit of research as I was seeing my various doctors for treatment and chemotherapy and all kinds of other things, and then had to go onto the internet. There are 27 bones in the human hand, 26 bones in the human foot. There are only 206 bones in the human body, but 106 of those bones are in the hands and the feet. That means when the body decays, and he had been buried in a wooden casket, and so it disintegrated. This would be very moist, wet soil. Uh, I'm sure those did not make the trip, so they're still down there in Portland. Scott, however, in getting together things, kept a portion for himself. He had some thoughts, some ideas, and had some expenses, so he helped himself to some of them and kept them separate and aside. The best I can figure out is he took the skull, three leg bones, and an arm bone, and hair lockets. Our hair doesn't disintegrate. So he kept the lockets of Quantrill's hair and parceled them out to people as the need arose. Um, he had an idea that he was going to write a book on Quantrill. He was a classmate of him from school, but he was not going to publish it till after Mrs. Quantrill passed away. And he thought that he could maybe recap some of his expenses by selling these bones. But Mrs. Quantrill outlived Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott had kept the bones that he had in the newspaper office up on the second floor. I always wonder what those second floors were used for. Uh, he offered to sell some of these bones to the Kansas State Historical Society, thinking they'd pay good money. But transaction never came to fruition. Now, this sounds rather gory, but I go back in previous occupations and all, and one of the things that I discovered at a transaction of human remains was during this era, there were uh, rather ghoulish uh, displays at the county fair and in circuses and other places. So that would not be an unusual trait to go see human bodies or cadavers or uh, infants in the various stages of development at a show at, at on the in the sidelines. I don't think I'll go into that. Now, maybe I will. During the Great Depression, um, small towns would find hobos, would-be hobos, people that had just taken off to find a better life or something, dead along the railroad tracks. There was a case in Ohio. The gentleman's name was Eugene. Eugene was an African American gentleman. They found his body in the 1930s. Um, the local funeral home embalmed him and waited for someone to claim the body to take home and bury in the family plot. Never was. Some 30 years later, they finally buried him in the local cemetery with just the name Eugene, which came from a note they found in the coat pocket. But so this type of thing in that portion of our history was anything but out of the ordinary. Well, Mrs. Quantrill wanted her son to be buried next to where she was going to be buried in the 4th Street Cemetery in Canal Dover, which was probably a city cemetery, and that's the reason I go reference back to the various laws and all dealing with cemeteries. The city objected vehemently. There were a considerable number of Union veterans still living in the area, and they just wanted absolutely nothing to do with this person being buried in the local cemetery. So finally, there was a compromise, and it was decided that yes, you can bury him in an unmarked grave in a private ceremony. So this was accomplished with Mrs. Quantrill and a handful of relatives, supporters, like 5, 6 people. They interred the bones that had been brought back by Mr. Scott, minus the bones that he had kept. Grave number 2, if we're counting. Now, here's a picture of myself taken about 10 years ago, and I am at the 4th Street Cemetery, and I am standing above the tombstone for Mrs. Quantrill and another son of hers. The next slide, a little farther away, Quantrill, Mrs. Quantrill on the right, I believe that's Franklin, which was the youngest son on the left. He had kind of been in and out and never had done much of anything, but they're buried together. I asked my wife when I was looking at this in proofreading, do you ever remember seeing a mother and child with the same marker? And other than in infancy, she could not remember. I don't know if anyone in the group has ever noticed that. I've seen markers for whole families or for groups, but nothing quite like this. Now, to the right, there is a slab on the grass, and that is William Clarke Quantrill's grave number 2. And at this point, I'm going to point out that you will notice there is a grave marker of some sort, a little star right behind it. We'll come back to that as we get there. So now we've got 2 graves. Okay, this was the stone right above William Clarke Quantrill. That I read that this was a government tombstone, which he somehow qualified for. I'm not sure on this, but got. But again, that's grave number 2. But Mr. Scott still had the skull and the bones. He eventually donated the leg bones to the Kansas Historical Society. They put them on in inventory and occasionally brought them out for display. Unfortunately, in the story of this, when they were inventoried and assigned a number, they were misinventoried along with other human bones. Large historical societies and institutions of higher education, particularly in the East, have in their collections a lot of human bones. Generally, these come from the excavation of Indian mounds and various other prehistoric native populations. Well, in 1989, the Kansas legislature, hearing what Congress was about to do, passed their Unmarked Burial Sites Preservation Act. And it was a time that, as these institutions looked in their inventories and saw what they had, and whether they will say so in public or not, were probably aghast at, my God, we've got all this. And they don't really keep. They do deteriorate. But let's take advantage of this. Let's get this all passed. Or they were happy as could be, I think, to see it being passed. Now, every once in a while, I will see on the internet a little article about the institutions that are not in compliance with the federal Unmarked Grave Act. And I'm still a member, but the Ohio History Connection, formerly the Ohio Historical Society, is generally about number 2 on that list. But there are literally hundreds of thousands, if not more, sites in the state of Ohio that were inhabited by prehistoric peoples. And nobody can quite figure out what tribe they were. So what tribe do we turn these over to? In 1992, we celebrated Columbus's discovery of America, and we were back in central Ohio and visiting a site, and they were doing a little cross section of a mound, and there were protesters out there protesting this because of this returning. But looking at it from the standpoint of the Historical Society and these academic institutions, if we give them to Harold, Dave's going to be upset about it and is going to yell and scream and sue me. So, who gets them? I don't know. I'm glad I'm not in that business, because, boy, that's one just very, very difficult. But in this case with Quantrill, it was a gift from heaven. There were individuals that negotiated with the Kansas Historical Society about the bones that had been on display and what can we do with them. An agreement was reached, and I think at a kind of an appropriate that they'd be buried in the cemetery of the Confederate Soldiers' Home in Higginsville. So that was arranged, and how were we going to do it? How were we going to transfer? What all we were going to do? And it was a go and just setting it up. Missouri is one of, I believe, only two states in the United States that had a home for Confederate veterans. All the rest of the Deep South, probably too poor, and didn't have the money to set up a home for these Confederate veterans. Uh, so this was where they went, the old soldiers' home, but it was Confederates, and they raised the stars and stripes every day, and were very good about things. Officials in Dover had been contacted, why not put these, with the rest of him back there, but they didn't want another spectacle of the thing. So on October 24th of 92, a locket of Quantrill's hair and some other parts of his body were put in an eagle cooler, and then in a period hand-built casket and buried before a crowd of some 600 people at the Confederate Soldiers' Home. Now, as I read the stories of the burial, it turned into quite a spectacle. There were ladies there in period dress. There were marching drums. There was a color guard. Uh, and the author that I was reading stated that in the color guard, there was one African American young man that was part of the contingency on that of the school, the military school, or wherever they got it from. And did he have any idea who he was honoring? It's kind of an irony, but we have, a show, a whole show on it. That's what am I up to? One, two, three. And if you have never been to Higginsville to the home, it is quite an interesting trip. This is the chapel from the exterior. The cemetery is over to our left, as I remember. This is his grave. Captain William C. Quantrill, Missouri Partisan Ranger. What was the Missouri Cavalry? Hmm. You know. So we have different graves, and he's got different ranks or different units that who he's with. 1, 2, 3. We're down to what happened to the skull. As I said earlier, the skull had been kept in the newspaper office, but Scott passed away. His son took over. Son knew some people. They knew he had it. It was kind of a hush-hush type thing. And certain questions were asked or requests made back and forth. I had read one place where the skull was used as the skull in the Yale Skull and Bones Society. In doing the research on this, boy, that sounds the furthest from anything. But secret societies were very popular in the late 19th, early 20th century. And some Dover boys decided that they would organize a society. It later became the Zeta chapter of the Alpha Phi fraternity. And they borrowed the skull, or got the skull to be used in initiation rites. They put little stuff around it, I don't know, like a wreath at Christmas, and set the skull in it. And they hooked up red lights in the eye sockets. Well, you come from the greatest guerrilla of the American Civil War to having red electric lights in your eye sockets. I think that's kind of a downer. But these societies started falling out of favor, and when the fraternity closed, they had a 50th year reunion. And what do you do with the old skull? Well, they donated to the Historical Society in Dover. The Historical Society partnered with Kent State University in Kent, Ohio, probably infamous for another shooting during Vietnam. But the departments there um, helped make a wax head of uh, of the skull to see what Quantrill would look like. Now, in talking with one of my friends, a retired history prof who's graduated the University of Cincinnati program, Harry told me that Kent State was probably the elite history department in the state system of Ohio. So this was not just a fly by night organization of a couple people putting things together. And it was a nice replica, kept in an old 1920s, 1930s refrigerator, along with the staff sack lunches and various other things. Here you got to open the door and see. We visited that area, and I was too intimidated to ask about it. Whoever the docent or person on duty, I had the feeling they have been asked many, too many times to, can you open the refrigerator and let me take a look? So I kept my mouth shut and did not bother. But well, the skull was finally decided, and there was an agreement with the folks in Dover. And on October 30th, 92, the day before Halloween, the skull was put in a fiberglass child's coffin and buried 3 feet down in Quantrill's grave. His body is 6 feet down, the skull is 3 feet down. I think this marks his fourth grave. I'm not exactly sure how you would determine that. There are some places, some countries where they do a double grave, that one body is placed upon top of another. So I think that that would give credence for me to claim this is his fourth. Now, again, if you can see the picture on the side and you see the little shadow of the marker and William Clarke Quantrill, you see the marker there on the grave? Well, I got interested last night in my photos, since this is my personal photo, I could start zeroing in on that star. And it kind of drew my question. It said, veteran, I believe, in the middle. And then on the points of the star, FGL. And I'm going, what in the world is that? I further researched that, or FCL, excuse me, stands for fraternity, charity, and loyalty, the core principles of the GAR, Grand Army of the Republic. So Quantrill has a grave marker from the GAR on this grave. I'm at a loss, other than somebody who either just grabbed a marker someplace and stole it and put it here for the hell of it, just for a spoof, or perhaps I don't know, but that is a mystery to me. I looked up earlier today on the Sons of the American Revolution, and I noticed in their store you could buy a grave marker as being either a member of the Sons of the American Revolution or a patriot, that is, fought in the American Revolution, for I think it was $175, and that included the bronze steak. So maybe somebody went to the GAR website. Uh, I think this would probably be before websites, and bought one and decided to put it there as a government marker, or not knowing the difference. So my sources primarily um, on this, besides a lot of reading in the past 20 years on Quantrill, would be The Devil Knows How to Ride by Edward Leslie, which primarily I utilized the last footnotes of his book on the last episodes and incidences of Quantrill's life. And the YouTube, which again I would highly point out, of Meet the Past, William Clarke Quantrill, but the Kansas City Public Library. Well, that kind of ends my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to come up with something.
Yep. I have one question, comment.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure what it is. It's been probably close to 50 years ago. I was traveling through Kentucky with my family,
Yes, sir.
and there was a thing that said Quantrill's grave is here somewhere. I was thinking it was in Frankfort, Kentucky, the capital. Anyway, I I'm not sure whether it was there or Louisville. I'm not sure on that. But anyway, it was a well-traveled little route through this cemetery, and you could drive by and see a marker for Quantrill's grave. Would that have been at that burial site number one?
You would have been in Louisville, and the river, the Ohio River, you would have sensed it being over there. You would have heard ships or whistles or something.
Yeah,
Uh, and
but it seemed to
Louisville,
be in some hills. And
okay.
I was figuring that site there where the first burial took place was fairly flat.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. That's
Hmm.
on a plain. The Ohio River has a huge plain, um, and where the cities were built. Um, that sounds like Frankfurt, but
Yeah,
again, there. Think how I speak well of the dead and Mr. Quantrill. Um, there seems to be more misrepresentation and heaven knows what uh, upon him. You know, even while he's alive conducting raids, there would be reports of him having raids in Arkansas, Kansas, and Missouri
right.
all on the same day. And they weren't down in the southeast corner. They were in Columbia, Topeka, and Pea Ridge. It's just kind of an amazing. Um,
I'm beginning to think I got a scam. Seems like we paid $2 to drive this little road through there to see the grave. And I think that was a scam.
well,
It's been so many years ago, and my brain cells have lost some of that memory.
hey, tell me about it. Um, it could be down. What was it, Taylorsville, on the Wakefield farm. That would meet kind of your description in the hills, but that would be about 35 miles south of Louisville over towards Franklin or Frankfort. Now I'm mixing up the capitals of Kentucky. Is it Louisville, Lexington, or Frankfort? Frankfort.
Frankfurt's capital.
Yes,
Well,
but that would be kind of on the way. And he's
I don't
supposed,
remember ever being in Taylorville.
well, it's a town, if you blinked, you missed the sign.
Yeah. I'm just going to write it up to I lost $2 to a scam once upon a time.
But the more that I've studied Quantrill, and particularly preparing for this, the more that seems to be the common. It just my disclaimer now is I don't know if anything I've just told you tonight is true or not. I'm beginning to worry about myself. It's so unique.
Jim,
Yes, sir.
could you show us the, I'm really curious about the GAR thing.
Yes,
Now,
sir.
can you show us a detail of that
No, I can't. Unless Stacy knows how I can.
now it would be on the gravesite there? Is it?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay,
sir. That's
It's
what
right
that
above
little.
the flat stone, Dave.
yeah. Uh, you know, but there is another, if I remember correctly in your talk, there's another gravestone that has that same,
That was the same gravestone earlier
okay,
when his remains were brought back, and there was a picture of myself, then the next gravestone. So, and I think I even pointed it out.
okay. Now, the other question goes to Harold. Harold, you and I, many years ago, went to Higginsville, and I do not remember the Quantrill gravestone. Do you?
Uh, Not on that trip.
Yes.
Uh, I have been there other times since then and have seen it.
Oh, you have
It's
seen it. Okay.
yeah, it's like shown here on the screen. It's way back in the corner,
Huh.
uh,
Now
and it's
Now,
remember,
a
was
that little
92.
symbol, the little cross up at the above Captain,
Yes, sir.
is that the GAR symbol?
No.
Okay.
I want to say that is a cavalry cross. I saw that reference someplace, but that is a cross that is used for marking certain graves, but it is not the GAR.
Uh, just as an interesting aside, this is a Confederate gravestone
right.
compared to a federal gravestone, which would be rounded on the top rather than coming to a point. And the folklore is that the point, I guess, was part of the federal system for some strange reason, but the Confederate graves are always with the gravestone with a point at the top rather than rounded off like you see most federal
Yeah,
gravestones.
thank you. Did not realize that.
The purpose is that is the Confederate lady said they didn't want any damn Yankee sitting on their gravestone.
That's exactly, that's right. That's the thing I was trying to remember that story. That's it. But anyway, you can if you're in a a cemetery, and I remember this. We were on a field trip, and I was looking at the gravestones from the back, and I said, "Oh, here are two Confederates, here," and everybody kind of looked at me like, "What?" And I was just going by the shape of the gravestone.
It would make
That was
sense.
down in Arkansas
Yeah,
at Prairie Grove. Is that the name of it?
yes, it was.
Right.
Oh, anyway, that little little known facts of mice and men, I guess.
I will
Anybody
try to
got any
keep
other
it in my
questions?
memory back.
Yeah, I do.
Evan?
Uh, Jim, I may have missed something, but did you say there was a direct connection between the American Revolution and the GAR?
No, no.
No. Okay. Okay.
What I was what I was saying was I had checked in the Sons of American Revolution website, and you can buy a grave marker similar to this
Okay.
one, but as an SAR. So when we first moved to Columbia, my wife's third or fourth great grandfather's grave was decorated out in Midway. She has two grandfathers that fought in the Revolution. They have the grave of one, Lemon, I believe it is, and Lemon or Hatton, I forget which. But the SAR decorated that and they put the little marker on. So, and a question usually comes up is with any organization such as that is who's going to pay for this? Because $175 3 or 4 times a year will take a bite out of your budget.
Any other questions out
All
there?
right. Thank you.
Well, Jim, thank you very much.
Thank
I
you all.
enjoyed this.
Yes.
Lots of applause to you for bringing the story to us.
Hey, Harold, I think Mike Devaney might have a question. Mike, do you have a
Okay, Mike.
question? He's muted. Hang on. Mike, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself.
I can unmute him.
Or write in bigger
Can you hear me
letters.
now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
No.
thank you. I spent a lot of time in eastern Jackson County, in the Burnt District, I guess, although I didn't know it at the time. And at least 2 different locations north of Colburn Road and near the Snibar River, or creek, which is the dividing line between Jackson County and Johnson County.
Mm-hmm.
There had been rumors of booty that Quantrill had apparently buried or hid, and other artifacts that people were interested in that area. And I just wonder if you've ever heard anything to that effect. This is now part of the blue and gray park area.
Mm-hmm.
So
In researching this, I have read more accusations, theories, comments, stories. Quantrill did not die. A spaceship came down from Mars, picked him up, and took him away. I almost called Harold a few weeks ago and said, I give up. I can't do this. It's beyond me. It is amazing. I made reference, I think, in my notes about this. Somewhere years ago, I read that more books have been written about Quantrill as a character in the American Civil War than any other individual except Abraham Lincoln.
wow.
And if you think of the number of books on Abraham Lincoln, my previous, before I retired, I was the director of planned giving for a small college in Columbus, Ohio. And I called on one of our alums who was part of the Lincoln impersonators. And he looked more like Lincoln than several of the highly publicized ones. And we would talk about that as we were just kind of chatting about things. It's amazing. All of the books that are written about these two people, and can you have two more opposite types of individuals? And what I forgot to mention, I assume that everyone in this organization or listening to this is familiar with Quantrill and his history. And when he got started, we didn't know if he was pro-slavery or anti-slavery. Well, he was leading a group of free staters against a plantation in Missouri. He turned on the free staters and gave them away, and then helped physically attack them. I forget the name of the farm now. But when questioned about this, he told the story about how he and his older brother were headed to Colorado, and they were attacked by free staters, and his brother was killed, and an Indian nursed him back to health, and that it wouldn't be for all this and everything. Remember, he's the oldest child. When you're the oldest child, how do you have an older brother? But his demeanor, his conniving, his what have you, it just, as I said, I spent a couple of weeks trying to come up with the word, and conniving was the best I could do one night.
Yep.
Again, that Kansas City Public Library YouTube is phenomenal. It really gives away, I think, the depth of, and I thought the actor portraying him was, although a little fluffy for Quantrill, was superb. Please don't hold that against me, whoever you are. You did a fantastic job in that presentation. But yes.
By the way, that farm where Quantrill, turned on the Free Staters,
Yes.
it's now in Burr Oak Woods. But the house that, where he turned them on, that house has been moved to Missouri Town. And so the house still exists, even though it's not in the same place.
Well, I was thinking of the number of years. That's amazing.
And
because
by the way, I went to a program a couple of months ago, and it was in Liberty, but the speaker was from the St. Louis area, and he is a trained criminologist, and he said you can understand Quantrill if you look at the thinking of a criminal, and he said one of the things is that if criminals associate with others who are doing the same kind of thing, then they gradually don't see it as a crime. It's just, this is what everybody does. That was his take on Quantrill.
thank you. Thank you very much. It puts
And-
the pieces together.
And that man, that speaker, he is on the Missouri Humanities Speakers Program. So if you want to get a Missouri Humanities speaker, he's on their list.
Keep it in mind.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Again, it's been a very interesting evening, very informative. A lot of contributions from participants. And guys, we'll see you next month when Mike's wife is going to tell us about nursing in the Civil War.
Right.
We look forward to that also. Thanks everybody for attending, and see you next time.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.